In today's video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a really unique, fun design with a snake theme. This would be perfect for snake lovers. We've never done a cake like this before. All of our cakes are usually more on the cute side, so this was a fun change of pace for us, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so for our carved spiral tier, we're starting off with a 4-layer cake. You can see it's already filled and it stands at about 5 inches tall. I also have a cake board beneath the cake so that we can easily move it to the pedestal a little bit later. So the first step that I'm doing is I'm using a food coloring pen to mark off where we're going to be doing our carving. So on the front side of the cake, about the front half of the cake, I am drawing a slope across the front with a food coloring pen, and I'm using a ruler to mark off at the 1 1/4 inch mark on the top of the cake above where we have drawn our slope. One thing you'll notice in a minute is that on my knife that I'm going to use for carving, I've also marked off a line at the 1 1/4 inch mark. And then I'm just going to kind of map out where we'll eventually kind of round things out on top of the cake later. Okay, so here you can see there's a mark, there's a line on my knife. And so the purpose of that is so that I know that I'm going to push the knife into the cake until that mark reaches the cake, and then I'll pull it out. I'm going to repeat that as I go all the way down the slope. And what this does is that it gives us a nice consistent ledge. Once our carving is finished, we're going to have a 1 1/4 inch ledge wrapping around the front of the cake. And next we're going to do the same thing on top. We're going to follow the little markings that we've created and make vertical cuts. First, I'm making fairly shallow vertical cuts across the top. But then once we get really into the carving, you'll see that we kind of line things up with the slope. So my first vertical cuts are shallow, but then as we move down the slope, of course, the cuts are going to need to be deeper. And this will make more sense as you begin your carving. You can adjust as needed, but to me, this is the simplest way to go about it. So just starting from the top of the slope, I'm just going to remove that first section. To me, it's much easier to work section by section, just really small pieces of cake. And with the next cut, we're going to go slightly deeper, again following the slope that we drew. And we'll just continue all the way down. And now I have sped up the video, but you can see that the process is repetitive. It's just a matter of making our cuts and following the lines that we created. But I did want you to see the whole process. So you can just kind of make little spot corrections as needed as you work. And then the final vertical cuts are deep because we've made it to the bottom of the slope. And you can see now there's sort of a wall there at the bottom, and we need to round that out because we don't want that wall there. So I'm just kind of removing that little corner, and that gives us more of a rounded look. And if you're looking at it from the top, it's almost like an oval shape on top. Okay, and again, we're just fine-tuning. By the way, I recommend working with partially frozen cake layers. I think it's a lot easier to do your carving that way because the cake is going to be less fragile. Okay, so I think we are in good shape. There's just this one little section at the top. I wanted to kind of get rid of that sharp corner also, so that there's a nice smooth transition to the top of the cake. Okay, so now our cake is ready to frost. You can go in and just frost your crumb coat, but whenever I have sort of crumbly cake layers, especially when you've been doing carving, I think it's easier to pipe on the buttercream, and that's what I'm doing here. I've just loaded my buttercream into a piping bag with the tip snipped away, especially on those more fragile parts, because at this point our cake is no longer partially frozen, and so it's just a little softer than I like. So I am just going to frost over that piping that we piped on, and just continue all the way around until our cake is crumb coated. Okay, so we are going to be creating a stump cake, but as you can see, our buttercream right now is green. Just ignore that because we had a design change. At first we were going with more leaves and vines, but then we decided we'd rather do a stump. So what you're going to do is just crumb coat the cake and then go right in with creating your stump. I'm frosting the top of the cake with an ivory shade of buttercream. And that's just going to represent the top of the stump. And also our slope is going to be frosted in this ivory shade as well. So if you find it easier, you can pipe on the lighter shade of frosting on the slope. But as you can see, I'm just kind of spreading it on with my spatula. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to be going in with a darker shade of brown around the sides. So you don't have to worry so much about keeping it nice and neat around the sides of the cake yet. So I'm just going to get that color on and then remove the excess frosting around the sides. And then next, to represent the rings of the tree stump, I'm just creating a spiral. As you can see, I have my offset spatula. I'm just applying pressure, beginning in the middle of the top of the tier, and then just rotating the cake on the turntable as we work our way out. And I'm also adding similar lines to our slope. So now I am using some buttercream tinted with Americolor chocolate brown, or if chocolate frosting goes with your cake flavor, you could also use chocolate buttercream. First I was just going to spread it on this way, but I eventually switched to my piping bag just to kind of outline the top edge of the cake and also along the slope and bottom of the cake. Doing it this way just gives me a little bit more control, and then I can just go back in and fill in with my buttercream. As I'm piping my dark brown next to the light brown, I do try to pipe it just slightly taller than the lighter brown shade of buttercream, just so it looks nice and enclosed like a tree stump. Now that the cake is frosted, you can leave this textured look if you'd like. I decided to go in and create more texture using a small tapered spatula. And so you can see that I'm just really quickly going through and making my vertical impressions. And there's no wrong way to do this. I actually carried the spatula all the way up to the top so that it's slightly, the dark brown buttercream is slightly taller than the top edge of the cake. I just kind of like that rough look. But you should frost it with whatever texture you like. This process is very fast, which is nice. And if you want to incorporate some lighter shades of brown or different shades of brown into the bark, that's nice too. It's hard to tell in the video, but I did have a lighter shade of brown also that I worked into the frosting. But that's up to you. Now it's time to make our snake, and today we are making a coral snake. I started out with a ball of red fondant that I rolled into a snake just back and forth until it was the length that I wanted. And you can see I left the head of the snake slightly wider. And then you can just shape that. I kept it really simple. And I'm just going to cover this right now with some plastic wrap. That's going to prevent it from drying out too much. And here I'm cutting out some strips of black fondant, just very thinly rolled. I'm using a little Tylose glue right now. We're going to adhere our black stripes. Just drape it over and then trim away the excess. And you may choose a snake that's much simpler, and the process will go even faster. There's endless options here. So once I go through several black stripes, it will be time to roll out our yellow fondant. Again, thinly rolled. This time the strips are a little thinner. And again, I'm just applying my edible glue or food safe Tylose glue, which, by the way, Tylose glue is a combination of Tylose powder with a little bit of water. You just combine it and it creates a sort of gel-like consistency, which makes a great glue. Okay, so I've wrapped the snake up and now we are working on our leaves. Now I made my leaves the day before so that they could be nice and dry. But I just wanted to show you really quickly how I made the leaves and grasses. I just freehand cut out some green fondant. You might want to knead in a little Tylose powder. And then I'm just making my markings with a knife. Adding Tylose powder to your fondant will make it dry faster and firmer. But just a little bit. Just a little bit of Tylose is enough. Okay, and here are some grasses. So I did several leaves and grasses in different sizes and different lengths. And also I did 2 shades of green. I did light and dark green. And then I'm placing them on a parchment lined cookie sheet to dry. And I'm also arranging them with just a little bit of movement. So you can prop it up with the side of the cookie sheet or however you like to arrange it. But that way, once they're dry, you can see my other pieces that have dried. They dry with a little bit of movement, which makes it more interesting once it's on the cake. This is my number 7 that I cut out from fondant with a good amount of Tylose kneaded into it, or you could use gum paste. This has been drying for about 24 hours or so. So I wanted to show you the process of attaching the lollipop stick anchor. So I'm using my Tylose glue. I have a strip of my fondant and I'm just going to place it right on top and around the lollipop stick to secure it. And although you can pick it up almost immediately, it's best to allow it to dry for about 30 minutes or so just to make sure that it's safe to pick up and stand on its own. Here I'm just kind of neatening up the back. I had a little tiny spot I wanted to get rid of. And that's all there is to it. So we're just going to lay this face down on our parchment as we continue working. Okay, so here you can see I have frozen the cake for about 15 minutes so that the buttercream is nice and firm. And I also want to make my snake slightly shorter so that I can more easily pick it up. That's optional, but I know I'm going to be using a lot of leaves on this cake, so it's going to be really easy for me to hide any seams like that. Another thing that you'll see a little bit later is I did decide to make my snake a little bit longer. So I do wind up adding another section of snake that will continue wrapping all the way around the cake. This is as far as this one goes for right now. And then just do any corrections that need to be corrected. And the next step is fun. It's just adding all of these leaves and grasses. And it really brings everything to life. And here I'm just carefully pushing in our number 7. The leaves you can attach with either by brushing a little Tylose glue onto the snake or just a little dot or two of buttercream on the back of the leaves. And I play around a lot with the arrangement of the leaves and grasses, but again, you can see this process is very simple. My buttercream was soft enough that they just pressed right on, but if they're not pressing on, if the buttercream is too crusted, just add a little bit of buttercream to the back. Okay, so here's our final section of snake. And I'll leave the gram weight for the amount of fondant that I used. But that just gives us a nice extra long snake, and again, it's no problem to hide the seams with leaves. You could even do just a ton of leaves on the bottom back of the cake, and then you could even make a shorter snake if you'd like to go that route. Okay, and you can see I added some dots, some red dots to the number 7. Those were cut out with a small round piping tip, number 12. And then I'm just adding some small little black eyes to the snake. And he's coming together. For the tongue, if you'd like to make a little tongue, I just made a tiny little snake of fondant. I actually combined a little bit of red and a little bit of black to get this color, and I just forked it on the end. And then I just made a small little cut with my knife for the mouth, and then just attach the tongue with just a little bit of Tylose glue and just a gentle press with the knife. Okay, so our snake cake is finished. I think it turned out really nice. I love the design, and this would be perfect for the snake lovers that you know. So hope you'll give it a try. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.